So let's look at this first concept. This first concept you'll find in all areas of NLP, and it is one of the concepts that we go into first and foremost because it's an important one. And when we apply these 5 principles for success in NLP, this can be applied to any area of life. And when we do this, it allows us to move into a space where we can gain consistent results. And really, NLP as a model or a system is really about looking at not the why, but the how to. It's about looking at how people were essentially getting consistent results in their field, in their area of expertise. And it was looking at the process that they were following. So if we can look at how people are getting, consistent results, we can also look at how people are getting consistent results that they don't want. So an example that might be, unwanted behaviors or reactions. There's a strategy that someone would be running, and at the end of the day, there's a time when that strategy starts and there's a time when that strategy ends. Whether we're consciously aware of it or not doesn't really matter. So if we can understand the how the strategy runs, then we can interrupt the strategy before the strategy begins and gives us the behavior or the unwanted state that we're looking to move away from. So when we look at these 5 principles of success, if you apply this in this training, if you apply this in your health, you apply this in your relationships, you apply this in your finances, you apply this in any area of life, you'll find that it crosses over. Now, these 5 principles for success ultimately are the fundamentals or the building blocks or the foundation, if you like, that we use in NLP to help build upon throughout the training and beyond. So let's have a look at them now. The very first and foremost of all of the principles, and probably the most important, is know your outcome. Always start with the end in mind. If we're always starting with the end in mind, then we essentially can reverse engineer that which we're looking to draw into our reality. When we look at this concept, it's really important, though, that we are able to chunk down and become really specific about exactly what it is we're after. And beyond that, not just what we want, but why we want it. Because at the end of the day, we can have away from motivation and towards motivation. If we have this away from motivation, that's really good sometimes to get us going. But ultimately, once we move away from that away from, and it's not quite as painful as it was before, we can be in a situation where we're just yo-yoing back and forth. It's not until we can turn and look at that towards motivation, the big powerful why, that it will keep us going when we don't feel like it. And generally, if we can link that powerful why ecologically, not just for ourselves, but also our loved ones, our family, our community, and the world, then it's a place that we can operate from of inspiration instead of desperation. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you were in a situation where one day you're standing in front of the mirror, you put on a bit of extra weight over Christmas, you go to do your jeans up, and all of a sudden, oh no, the jeans don't fit. And it invokes negative emotion, maybe feeling sadness, guilt, frustration, you name it. And you go, no, that's it. Today I'm going to make this change. Today I'm going to join up at the gym. I'm going to start walking every morning. I'm going to start eating more consciously. I'm going to start nourishing my body more. Today is the day I make the change, because you just had enough. And some time passes and you're really consistent with your rituals. You're really good. You're going to the gym daily. You're getting those walks in daily. You're really being conscious with your eating. And then all of a sudden you feel a little bit better. The jeans are fitting a little bit better. You're feeling a bit better in your body, and you start to get a little bit complacent on some of those rituals that you had. And, it's a bit of a cold morning. Oh, I'll skip the gym. It's raining. You're like, oh, I could do some exercise. It's like, nah, it's all right. You have a few social events and you start to fall off the wagon a little bit. And then before you know it, a few weeks have passed. You had some really good results, but then you're kind of back to where you started. That's because we've just focused on that away from motivation, and it creates this yo-yo effect. Now, when we have this powerful towards motivator, let's say that I was like, I've had enough, I'm not doing this anymore. You know what? I really want to go hiking with my son. I really want to do that hike in New Zealand that he said, he'd always wanted to do with me, and I've never been fit enough to do that. He's starting to get a little bit older now. He'll be leaving high school in a year or so, and I really want to have that experience with him. And so suddenly that powerful motivation that we had before that came from and away from, we now have an even more powerful towards motivator that we're moving towards, which has a powerful why attached to it, which is not just for us, but for our son, to have that experience, to create that magic memory with them that, may pass if we don't take the action now. And suddenly those mornings where it's a bit cold, you don't feel like doing it, because you've got that powerful why, because you're not just doing it for yourself anymore, it keeps you going. You're working from a place of inspiration instead of desperation. And maybe you can see it in your mind and you can envisage it and you can feel the emotions of being on the top of that mountain with your son and having that experience. Now that's a powerful why. And this is the difference between focusing on just purely away from motivation without the powerful towards. So we need to know our outcome, and it actually should be stated in the positive, not be focused on what we don't want, but focus rather on what we do want. That's really important. So that's number one. And we want to have these goals really specific in the sense of they want to be SMART goals. So we want it to be specific to what we're looking to achieve. We want it to be measurable. And wanting it to be attainable for us in the time frame that we're given it. We want it to be relevant to us, and that's where the powerful why comes in. We want it to be time frame. So you're not just saying, I want to do this with my son. I want to do it in December the 5th. We want to go there together and get this done. Okay. By having it time framed, by having the goal set out in a matter where it's relevant to us, and by setting it out where it's measurable, we can set a bit of a schedule in place. We can create some tracking, some measuring that's going to allow us to know if we're on track to achieve that goal. Let's say you wanted to lose 12 kilos in 12 months. How much is that a month? Kilo a month. So what strategy am I going to run that is going to help me achieve that goal? And let's say that we're halfway through the month and I haven't lost half a kilo, then maybe I need to change my approach. Maybe I need to switch something up. Maybe I need to do something differently to assist me to gain that result. And this is why it's so important to be really specific about the goal that you're looking to achieve. Make sure it's stated in the positive and make sure it's got a powerful why attached to it. So number one, you always need to know your outcome. You can't hit a target that doesn't exist, right? So number two of the principles for success, take action consistently. So consistency over time equals results. Now, that's not to say that if you just take action consistently with the wrong strategy that you're going to get results, right? At the end of the day, you might go, oh, I heard this shake diet works. Now, is it going to be sustainable for you? Maybe it works in the short term, but not in the long term. So that might not be the right strategy that you can do consistently to give you results into the future. So sometimes a little bit of research is needed. Sometimes maybe some mentorship, sometimes some modeling of somebody else that has gone before you that has got the results that you want, maybe finding out what they did. Maybe modeling that individual, not copying, but modeling the strategy that they run and see if that works for you. You can only but experiment. But if it's not working, change your approach. And if it's not working, change your approach. But if you have the right strategy, it's stated in the positive, it's got a powerful why attached to it, and you take action consistently over time, it will equal the results that you're after. Okay? So that's number two. Number three, we need to learn to listen and observe. We want to model excellence and be the student, because success leaves clues. If we have the ability to observe people, and especially those who have got the certain results that we're after, if we really have the eyes to see it, we can see the character of that individual, the way they act or react, what they do or don't do. What sort of state of mind have they cultivated? What sort of things do they eat? What sort of environment do they put themselves in? What sort of people? What sort of things do they feed their mind with? And guess what? You'll notice that if you start to apply some of these same principles, you will start to get some similar results, perhaps, most likely. You always need to experiment these things. But especially in NLP, this is a really, really important point. We need to learn to be an active listener, because it's not what somebody is saying necessarily through words, but rather through sensor acuity, which is looking at the finer parts of communication. So not just body language, but looking at facial features, expressions. Breath is a great indicator of what's really going on for someone. Coloration of skin. These are all factors we can start to delve a little deeper into to get a real understanding of what is truly going on within the person we're working with. And even the very words that somebody's using tells us a lot about what's going on in here. So we get really good at this in NLP. So that's number three. Number four, have behavioral flexibility. As the wind changes, adjust the sails. Now, the only constant in all of life is change. That's undeniable, right? The only constant in all of life is change. So we can either resist change or we can flow with change itself. Now, there are no unresourceful people in NLP, which you'll soon find out in some of the presuppositions of NLP. But what you'll find is that in NLP, we're really big on behavioral flexibility, really big on looking at that there's no unresourceful people, rather unresourceful states. Because if you can't find the way, you can always make the way. You know, if it's a must, you'll always meet your must. You know, if you can think outside the box, if you can be playful enough, if you can be creative enough, if you can be innovative enough, you can always find the way. So instead of looking at things as problems in NLP, we rather look at things as situations that just need solutions. And it allows us to delve a little bit deeper into this concept of this is not happening to me, but rather something that is happening for me. So behavioral flexibility is so important in NLP, and you'll see as we delve deeper into the slides today, you'll get a better understanding of this concept of behavioral flexibility. And that was number 4. So number 5, we need to always operate from a physiology and a psychology of excellence. Now, when we say a psychology and physiology of excellence, we're looking at this relationship between the mind and the body. And ultimately, the way we hold our body, the way we breathe, the way we think has an effect on both systems ultimately, doesn't it? And we can actually choose our state that we want to show up as by embodying certain attributes or modeling certain attributes of someone else who we see as being masterful in that area. So what we can do is we can actually assist ourselves on that journey by having the appropriate rituals and practices that are going to allow us to actually move into more of a peak state, which is a state in which we're able to consciously decide the way in which we choose to operate in our reality. Now, there's a big difference between reacting to life and responding to life. And this is something that we need to start to look at, because ultimately it all starts with our thought. The thoughts that we have invoke a certain emotion and then sometimes creates another thought, which therefore affects our physiology, which therefore affects our action or lack of action in reality. It affects if we're someone who's constantly reacting or someone who's consciously responding. And we hear this a lot in a lot of mindful practices, but the ability to practice the pause is such a powerful thing in mindful practices, because it means that you can catch your thoughts before emotion captures too strongly to the actual thought itself. Imagine if everyone just could pause just for that one moment before they got so wound up in the emotion itself. This is ultimately what we're starting to get to a state to in NLP, at least teaching this fundamentally. And it's a muscle. It takes time to develop this consciously, and it takes even more time to develop this unconsciously. But once we exercise this muscle, once we bring awareness to this, we can be the observer of our thoughts. We can start to catch those thoughts before they just run wild without any sort of check-in or observation of. And then essentially we can actually start to decide what each event means. And it's the meaning to each event or each thought that really ultimately creates the emotion and what we're looking for. And that's a big part of NLP, and what we really help our clients with is to essentially unpack these thoughts and look at the meaning behind these thoughts, and also, dare I say, the truth in the thoughts themselves. At the point of when you meet them, their truth will be absolutely those thoughts. It will be their model of the world, it'll be their limiting beliefs perhaps, but with enough more empowering questions that are echoed back to someone, then we can sometimes unhypnotize ourselves from the stuff that no longer really serves us. And we can maybe see the truth in some of the limitations that we've placed upon ourselves. Or should I say the untruth in those limitations rather. We can see the truth in the limitation, which we can start to realize that maybe that limitation that we thought was truth was maybe not so much truth, but maybe it was just a perceived truth, and maybe a new version of the truth starts to come through. So this is the fundamentals of what we can start to do as we start to work with or go with our clients.